My name is Robert Hayes, and I'm 68 years old. I have a full head of gray hair, calloused hands from years of working construction, and a life that most people would call ordinary, uneventful, safe. But 50 years ago, something happened at my high school that I thought I'd buried so deep that it would never see daylight again, until an invitation arrived at my door that changed everything. That invitation is what I'm going to tell you about tonight. See, when you're in high school, you think the things you do won't matter. You think the people you hurt will just get over it. You think that time and distance will make those memories fade away. That's what I thought, anyway. But I learned something very different at my 50-year high school reunion. I learned that some things don't fade. Some people don't move on. And sometimes, the past has a way of catching up with you in ways you could never imagine. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when the invitation arrived. I was sitting in my study, a small room in my Colorado home that overlooks the mountains, when my wife, Patricia, called up the stairs. "Bobby, there's something here you might want to see." I came down to find her holding a cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten in elegant calligraphy. It was unusual enough to catch my attention immediately. Who writes letters by hand anymore? The return address read, Roosevelt High School Class of 1975, 50th Reunion Committee. My stomach did a little flip. Our 50th reunion. 50 years. How was that possible? I could still remember walking those hallways like it was yesterday. Mrs. Henderson's geometry class. The cafeteria where we traded our lunch items. The football field where I played linebacker. I opened the envelope carefully, not sure why I felt so apprehensive. The invitation was beautiful, really. High-quality stock, embossed lettering, the works. It read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate 50 years of memories and friendship at the Roosevelt High School Class of 1975 reunion. Join us for an unforgettable weekend at Cedar Mountain Lodge, nestled in the heart of the Colorado Rockies. October 25th to 27th. Come reconnect with old friends and reminisce about the good old days." The dates were only 3 weeks away. Patricia smiled at me from across the kitchen counter. "That could be fun, Bobby. Remember how much you loved high school? All those football games and parties." I did remember. I remembered a lot of things. Some of them good. Some of them not so good. "Yeah," I said slowly, looking at the invitation again. "Maybe we could make a weekend of it." "We?" Patricia looked surprised. "It's a class reunion, honey. It's for you and your former classmates. I'll stay home with the kids." Our kids were actually 50 and 52, but Patricia still called them the kids. I nodded, folding the invitation back into the envelope. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Patricia, who was snoring softly, and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Roosevelt High. I thought about the friends I hadn't seen in decades. I thought about the teachers who had shaped me. And then, despite my best efforts not to, I thought about Tommy Garrison. Tommy Garrison had been in our class. He was a thin kid, wore glasses, had acne, and dressed in clothes that were clearly from a discount store. He was the kind of kid who didn't fit in anywhere. He sat alone at lunch. He had no close friends. And he was the favorite target of people like me. No, not just people like me. Me, specifically. I wasn't a bad kid, or at least that's what I've told myself my entire life. I was popular, athletic, good-looking. I had everything going for me. But in high school, I was also 18 years old and stupid. And stupidity at that age often looks a lot like cruelty. Tommy was an easy target. He didn't fight back. He didn't tell teachers. He just took whatever humiliation came his way with this sad, resigned look in his eyes. I remember making fun of his clothes. I remember accidentally spilling food on him in the cafeteria during lunch. I remember tripping him in the hallway and laughing when everyone else laughed. I was a leader, and where I went, others followed. The worst part happened senior year. It was a Friday night, and a bunch of us decided to go to a party at somebody's house. Tommy showed up. I still don't know why he thought he'd be welcome, and we decided to have some fun at his expense. We convinced him to go with us to the lake, told him we wanted to help him have a better social experience. We were lying, of course. We had something else planned. We got him drunk. I still remember how easy it was, how quickly the alcohol affected him, how he kept laughing nervously, still trying so hard to fit in even as we were setting him up for the ultimate humiliation. Then we took his clothes and threw them in the lake. We left him there, naked and shivering in the cold September night, and drove off. The next day at school, everyone was talking about it. About Tommy, about his body, about the whole pathetic thing. He became a complete social pariah after that. He barely showed up to school for the rest of the year. 3 months later, I heard he'd killed himself. I was shocked, but I didn't feel guilty. I was 18, and I compartmentalized that feeling so effectively that for 50 years, I forgot it almost entirely. Or at least I convinced myself I had forgotten. But lying in bed that night, holding that invitation in my hand, I remembered it all. Every detail, every laugh, every moment of cruelty. And I realized something that made my heart race. If they were holding a reunion for the class of 1975, and if they were inviting everyone, then where was Tommy's name on the reunion committee list? I pulled out the invitation again and looked at the list of committee members organizing the event. Thomas Garrison, reunion committee chairperson. My blood ran cold. I didn't sleep that night. I got out of bed at 3 in the morning and went downstairs to the living room, where I spent the remaining hours until dawn sitting in the dark, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Thomas Garrison, committee chairperson. The same Tommy Garrison who had, as far as I knew, killed himself in 1975? There were a few possibilities. Maybe I had the details wrong. Maybe he hadn't died. Maybe it was a different Tommy Garrison. The internet existed now, I could look it up. But I didn't. Not right away. I sat with the invitation, reading the details over and over. Cedar Mountain Lodge, October 25th to 27th. All attendees welcome. It said nothing about Tommy's supposed death. It was as if the event itself was centered around someone I'd been convinced had taken his own life 50 years ago. When the sun came up, Patricia found me in the living room, still in my pajamas, still holding the invitation. "Bobby, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just thinking about the reunion. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go." "Why not? You've always said high school was the best time of your life." I had said that, hadn't I? Because compared to the real world, the bills, the responsibilities, the disappointments, high school had seemed perfect. But the perfection was built on a foundation of someone else's pain. "I don't know. It just seems like a lot of effort to go see people I haven't talked to in 50 years. What would we even talk about?" Patricia shrugged. "You could probably find them on Facebook. Check them out before you go." That was actually a good idea. I could screen the attendees, see who was actually going, figure out if this was really Tommy or not. After Patricia left for her Pilates class, I took my coffee to the study and opened my laptop. I navigated to Facebook and searched for Roosevelt High School Class of 1975 Reunion. The Facebook group had about 300 members. I scrolled through the posts, seeing the usual reunion chatter. People posting old yearbook photos, making jokes about how much everyone had aged, sharing their excitement about reconnecting. Then I saw a post from Tommy Garrison. "Can't wait to see everyone. It's been 50 years, and I have so much to share with you all. It's going to be quite the weekend. Prepare for some real surprises." The post had been made 3 weeks ago, which meant he had posted it around the same time the invitations were sent out. The profile picture showed a man who could be Tommy. He had the same thin frame, but he was older now, his hair gray, his face weathered but recognizable. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his profile. He was a funeral director in Denver. He'd never married. He had no children. His life seemed to be entirely focused on his work and, apparently, this reunion. The comment section under his post was full of people responding enthusiastically. "Tommy, we can't wait to see you. This is going to be incredible. High school memories, here we come." But underneath all that enthusiasm, I felt something dark, something wrong. A post from someone named Marcus Webb said, "Tommy, Bud, are you sure about this? Some things are better left in the past." And Tommy had responded, "Marcus, my friend, some things need to be dredged up. Trust me." I closed the laptop, my heart pounding. I told myself I was being paranoid. So what if Tommy was alive? So what if he was organizing the reunion? Maybe he'd gone to therapy, worked through his trauma, and decided to reconnect with his high school class. That was actually a positive thing, wasn't it? But something inside me knew better. Something primal and ancient inside my consciousness was screaming that this was wrong. The next day, I called the number listed in the invitation. "Hi, this is Cedar Mountain Lodge. How can I help you?" "Yes, hi. I have a question about the Roosevelt High School reunion this weekend. Is it definitely happening? I just want to make sure before I make the drive out." "One moment, sir. Let me check our reservation system." The person on the phone, a woman with a pleasant, professional voice, put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed. It was quieter, almost hesitant. "Sir, I'm looking at our record, and yes, the Cedar Mountain Lodge reunion is definitely on the books. Checking in Friday evening, check out Sunday morning. However, I have to tell you, this is unusual, but I'm going to be honest with you because something about this event has been, well, off." "Off how?" "Well, the man who organized it, Thomas Garrison, he was very specific about certain things. He wanted the lodge to be completely isolated for the weekend. No staff on the property except for minimal maintenance people. He provided his own security team, and he was very insistent that everyone who was invited to this reunion confirm their attendance with a specific phrase." "Did you receive that information?" "I hadn't. I had just received the invitation." "What phrase?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "He said that anyone attending needed to confirm with the phrase, 'I remember Tommy.' Those were the exact words. And if someone didn't say that phrase, they weren't allowed on the property." "And what happened if they didn't say it?" "Well, sir, that's where this gets strange. Out of the original 235 invitations sent out, only 7 people confirmed with that phrase. 7. Out of 235. Do you know who they are?" "No, I'm not privy to that information. But I'll tell you what I do know, this feels wrong. And I've been working in the hospitality industry for 20 years. I know when something doesn't feel right." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my study for an hour without moving. 7 people. Only 7 people confirmed they were going to a high school reunion with Tommy Garrison. And I hadn't confirmed anything, which meant I wasn't invited. Or I was supposed to figure out what was happening and choose to come anyway. The question was, did I want to? That evening, I called my oldest friend from high school, Dave Kowalski. Dave and I had stayed in touch over the years, mostly through Facebook and the occasional phone call. He was a teacher in New Mexico, retired now, living a quiet life with his husband. "Dave, it's Bobby Hayes." "Bobby, what a surprise. Are you calling about the reunion?" "I got the invitation, but honestly, it seems kind of weird." "You didn't confirm you were going?" "No, man. That whole 'I remember Tommy' thing felt ominous, like some kind of cult ritual. And honestly, Tommy Garrison, I haven't thought about that guy in years." "But you remember him, don't you? From high school?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah," Dave said finally. "I remember him. He was that skinny kid nobody liked." "What about him?" "Well, apparently he's not dead. And apparently he's organizing the reunion." Another long pause. "Jesus," Dave whispered. That's not good, Bobby." "Why not?" "Why isn't it good?" "Because I was there, man. At the lake, that night with you and the others. I don't know if you remember, but I remember. I remember what we did to him. I've been in therapy for the last 15 years trying to work through the guilt of that night. And if Tommy Garrison is organizing a reunion just for the people who were there..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Are you going?" I asked him. "Hell no. Are you?" I told him I didn't know. We talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye, and after I hung up, I was left with more questions than answers. I told Patricia I was going to the reunion. I didn't tell her about my doubts, about my conversation with the lodge, about what I was starting to suspect. "That's wonderful, honey," she said. "You seem a little nervous about it, though. Are you okay?" "Just haven't been back around those people in a long time," I said, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. Friday morning, I packed a bag, told Patricia I'd be back Monday afternoon, and got in my car. The drive to Cedar Mountain Lodge was about 6 hours from my house. I spent most of the drive thinking about Tommy Garrison. What had happened to him after that night at the lake? Had he really tried to kill himself? I'd heard rumors, but they were just high school gossip. For all I knew, he'd transferred schools, had a nervous breakdown, or simply chosen to ignore the incident and move on with his life. But someone doesn't organize a reunion for the people who bullied them unless they're planning something. The Colorado mountains grew closer as I drove west. The landscape changed from plains to foothills to genuine mountain terrain. October in the Rockies is beautiful, but there's also something melancholy about it. The summer is gone, winter is coming, and everything is caught in this moment of transition. By the time I arrived at Cedar Mountain Lodge, it was late afternoon. The lodge was exactly what the name suggested. A massive log building nestled into the mountainside, with expansive windows overlooking the valley below. It was beautiful, isolated, and somehow ominous. There was a black Escalade parked in the circular driveway, and as I pulled up, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the building. "Mr. Hayes?" he asked, approaching my car. I stepped out, confused. "Yes. Welcome to Cedar Mountain Lodge. I'm security personnel. Before you can proceed to your room, I need to confirm you with the proper phrase." "What phrase?" I asked, even though I already knew. "I remember Tommy." I stood there, the mountain air crisp against my face, and the choice crystallized before me. I could say the phrase, or I could get back in my car and drive away. I could go home and tell Patricia the reunion had been canceled. Instead, I heard my own voice say, "I remember Tommy." The security guard nodded and stepped aside. "Mr. Garrison has assigned you to cabin 3. Here's your key. Dinner is at 7 p.m. in the main lodge. He's looking forward to reconnecting with all of you." I took the key and drove my car around to the cabin area, my heart thundering in my chest. Cabin 3 was a beautiful log structure with a stone fireplace, a large bedroom, and a view of the mountains. Under any other circumstances, it would have been idyllic. But all I could think about was whether I'd made a terrible mistake. I unpacked my bag slowly, watching the sun start to descend toward the western mountains. The sky turned pink, then orange, then deep purple. At 6:30, I left my cabin and walked up to the main lodge. There were 6 other people in the dining room when I arrived, sitting around a massive wooden table. They all looked up at me, and I recognized each of them immediately. Marcus Webb, who had been the quarterback. He was a lawyer in Denver. Catherine Wright, who had been a cheerleader, then a model, then apparently a successful entrepreneur. James Chun, who had been the class president, running for various local offices throughout the years. Susan Martinez, who had been the prom queen. Richard "Rick" Campbell, who had been a stoner in high school and apparently now owned a chain of dispensaries. And Linda Foster, who had been on the debate team. We'd all been at the lake that night. All of us. "Bobby!" Marcus jumped up and shook my hand, but his grip was sweaty and his smile was forced. "Good to see you, man." The others greeted me with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but I could sense the same tension I was feeling radiating from each of them. We all knew why we were here. We all knew what we had done. For the next hour, we made awkward small talk. We asked about careers, families, lives. We tried to pretend this was a normal reunion between old friends. But the elephant in the room was so enormous that every sentence felt like we were walking around it. Finally, at 7:30, Tommy Garrison walked into the dining room. He looked almost exactly as I remembered him, just older. Same thin frame, same intense eyes behind glasses, same meticulous, controlled movements. But something was different about him now. Something powerful. Something dangerous. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Thank you for confirming and attending. I know this reunion probably confused you. I know you didn't expect to hear from me. I know that many of you were hoping I'd stay in the past where you buried me 50 years ago. Nobody said anything. But I didn't stay in the past. I survived. I got out. I built a life. And about 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to reconnect with everyone from our high school class. So I sent out invitations to all 235 members of the class of 1975. He paused, letting that sink in. Do you know how many responded to that general invitation? How many said they'd love to reconnect? 183 people. Tommy smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. But then I added a condition. I said that to attend the reunion at Cedar Mountain Lodge, attendees had to confirm with a specific phrase. I remember Tommy. And suddenly the number dropped to just 7. You 7. He gestured around the table. Interesting, isn't it? When given the option to simply acknowledge my existence, most people chose to ignore me. But you 7, you had the courage to confirm. You had the courage to say, I remember Tommy. Listen, Tommy, Marcus started. We were kids. We did stupid things. We've all grown past that. Have you? Tommy asked. Have you really grown past it, Marcus? Or have you just been successful enough that you've never had to think about it? Look, we're sorry, okay? Catherine said. We were wrong. We were terrible. We've regretted it for 50 years. Have you? Tommy asked again. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the head of the table. That's interesting, Catherine, because I've been looking into your social media presence. You have a podcast where you talk about building confidence and self-love. Very inspirational stuff. But I noticed that you never mention your high school years. Not once. It's as if they simply didn't exist in your narrative. He turned to James. And you, James, you've been very successful in local politics. Very involved in community initiatives. I wonder if your constituents know about the night at the lake. I wonder if they know about the kind of character you were at 18. Tommy, are you threatening us? Rick asked, standing up. Threatening you? No, no, no. Tommy shook his head. I'm not threatening you. I'm just expressing my curiosity about how you've all managed to move on as if nothing happened. As if Tommy Garrison was just a minor inconvenience in your perfect high school experience. What do you want? Linda asked quietly. She'd been the most thoughtful person at the lake, I remembered. She'd been the one who suggested they leave me there. She was probably the one who felt the most guilty. Tommy stood up and walked over to a window overlooking the darkening valley. What do I want? He repeated. I want an answer to a question that's haunted me for 50 years. That night at the lake, when you took my clothes and threw them in the water, what did you think? What was going through your head? Did you think about what might happen to me? Did you think about how I might feel? Or was I just a punchline to you? Nobody answered. My therapist says I should let go of my past resentment. That holding on to anger only hurts me. And he's right. That's exactly what I've done over the years. Let go of my resentment. Turned it into something else. He turned back to face us. I've turned it into purpose. And that's why you're all here. Because you're going to help me achieve that purpose. What does that mean? Susan asked, her voice shaking. What are you going to do to us? I'm not going to do anything to you, Tommy said calmly. You're going to do it to yourselves. That's the beauty of what I've planned. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out 7 envelopes, each with one of our names written on the front in that same elegant calligraphy as the invitation. These contain instructions. Each of you will go to your cabin and open your envelope privately. Inside, you'll find a task, a specific thing you need to do tonight. Some of these tasks will be unpleasant. Some might make you uncomfortable. But all of you will complete them. Because if you don't, well... He trailed off and the implication hung in the air. Or what? Marcus demanded. Or you'll kill us. That's insane. Insane. Tommy smiled. Marcus, nothing I'm doing is insane. I've carefully planned this night for 2 years. I have a security team that's completely loyal to me. This lodge is completely isolated. No cell phone service, no internet, no way to call for help. And the 3 security guards outside are authorized to use whatever force is necessary to ensure that everyone completes their task. This is unlawful imprisonment, James said. This is extortion. This is justice, Tommy interrupted. Real justice. Not the kind that exists in your legal system where rich people like you can buy their way out of accountability. This is direct, personal, and permanent justice. He set the 7 envelopes on the table. You have 1 hour to return to your cabins, read your instructions, and complete your tasks. Then you'll all return here at 9 p.m. for dessert. Anyone who fails to complete their task, or anyone who attempts to leave the lodge grounds, will face consequences. Is that clear? We all just stared at him. Is that clear? He repeated, his voice harder. We all nodded. One by one, I grabbed my envelope off the table, feeling the weight of it in my hand. My name was written in that meticulous handwriting. Robert Hayes, or as Tommy probably still thought of me, Bobby the Bully. Bobby the Cruel. We filed out of the dining room without speaking. Nobody made eye contact with anyone else. We walked back to our separate cabins, each of us carrying our envelope like a death sentence. In cabin 3, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive paper. The handwriting was precise, careful, every letter perfectly formed. Robert, it's been 50 years since you left me naked at the lake. Do you remember how I felt? Do you remember the humiliation? Do you remember the laughter when you all drove away? For your task tonight, you're going to experience a small portion of that feeling. Go to cabin 7. In the bedroom, you'll find a costume. Put it on. Then go to the main lodge and sit with everyone for dessert. You'll be wearing it the entire time. What's the costume? You'll see when you get there. Remember, honesty isn't just about confession. It's about bearing witness to your own shame. Your former classmate, Tommy Garrison. My hands were shaking as I read the note. A costume? That's what he was making me do? Put on a costume? I looked at my watch. It was almost 8 p.m. I had less than an hour to figure this out and get back to the lodge. But before I could make a decision, I heard a knock at my cabin door. I opened it to find one of the security guards. Mr. Garrison said you'd be going to cabin 7. I'm here to make sure you go directly there and nowhere else. I nodded and stepped outside. The security guard, a large man with cold eyes, gestured for me to walk ahead of him. We walked through the dark Colorado night, the stars brilliant overhead, the mountains black and imposing. Cabin 7 was at the far end of the row, isolated and dark. Go inside, the guard said. You have 25 minutes. I pushed open the cabin door and stepped inside. The bedroom was on the left. I walked in and turned on the light, and immediately, I understood Tommy's message about bearing witness to shame. Because there on the bed was a costume. But it wasn't just any costume. It was a girl's cheerleader uniform. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. The little blue and white skirt, the sleeveless top, the absolute humiliation that wearing this would entail. For a moment, I considered refusing. I considered telling the security guard to go to hell, walking out, accepting whatever consequences came. But then I thought about what Tommy had said. About the 3 guards. About the isolation. About whatever he had planned for people who didn't comply. I changed into the costume. It was humiliating in a way I can barely describe. The skirt hung on my thin frame, and I looked absolutely ridiculous. Pathetic. Shameful. The security guard didn't say anything when I came out. He just started walking me back toward the lodge. By the time I arrived in the dining room, it was 8:58 p.m. The others had already gathered, and I immediately saw why Tommy had called this a journey of honesty and bearing witness to shame. Because I wasn't the only one wearing something humiliating. Marcus was wearing a bright yellow tank top with the words, "I'm a bully" written across it in big black letters. Catherine was wearing a wig that made her look like a complete caricature of an ugly woman, with exaggerated makeup that looked like something from a horror movie. James was wearing a clown costume, not a funny one, a sad, depressing clown that made him look absolutely grotesque. Susan was wearing a pig costume, a full head-to-toe pig costume that she could barely move in. Rick was wearing a KKK robe, or at least something made to look like one, which Tommy presumably used as a metaphor for his racism and bigotry. Linda was wearing a straitjacket. And then Tommy walked in, dressed in his normal clothes, and smiled at all of us. "Excellent," he said. "You've all completed the first task. How does it feel? To be exposed? To be humiliated? To have your shame made visible?" This is sick, Marcus spat. You're sick. Maybe, Tommy said. But you know what the difference is between us? I've acknowledged my darkness. I've worked through it. I've learned from it. You're still pretending to be better than you are. You're still hiding behind success and social standing and the illusion that you've moved past your cruelty. He sat down at the head of the table. Now, for course 2 of tonight's menu, each of you is going to tell your story. Each of you is going to explain in complete and honest detail what you were thinking that night at the lake. Why you did what you did. What you hoped would happen. And most importantly, what it says about the kind of person you truly are. And if we don't? James asked, his voice muffled slightly by the clown makeup. Then my security team will encourage you, Tommy said simply. Starting with electrified cattle prods. They're very persuasive. He wasn't joking. I could see it in his eyes. So one by one we told our stories. Marcus went first. I wanted to be seen as funny. I wanted to make people laugh. Tommy was an easy target, and making him the butt of a joke made me look good. Catherine said, I was jealous of anything that didn't fit into the popular group. I wanted Tommy to feel as excluded as possible so that I could feel powerful. James said, I liked the feeling of being in control. I liked being part of a group that had power over someone else. It made me feel important. Susan said, I was actually afraid of Tommy. He was so strange and quiet, and something about him scared me. So I lashed out before he could hurt me. I turned him into a monster in my head, so I wouldn't have to acknowledge that he was actually just a person. Rick said, I thought it was hilarious. I was a stupid kid, and the idea that his humiliation was entertainment was enough for me. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about his feelings. I just thought about the laugh. Linda said, I was complicit. I didn't actively participate, but I didn't stop it either. I went along with the group because it was easier than standing up for what was right. And I've regretted that cowardice every single day for 50 years. And then Tommy looked at me. And you, Robert? What's your story? I sat there, wearing that ridiculous cheerleader costume, and the weight of 50 years of running from this moment finally crashed down on me. I was a leader, I said quietly. I had power, and I used it to hurt someone who had nothing. I did it for a laugh. I did it because I could. And when I heard that you'd killed yourself, I convinced myself that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't caused it, that you would have found some other way to hurt yourself. I paused, and when I continued, my voice was shaking. But the truth is, I was terrified that your death was my fault, and I've spent 50 years running from that terror. And now, sitting here, I realize that I've built my entire adult life as a monument to not thinking about what I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. And I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, Tommy, but I'm asking anyway. The room was completely silent. Tommy watched me for a long moment, and then he did something I didn't expect. He started to clap. Excellent, he said. That was almost genuine, Robert. Almost. What do you mean, almost? I demanded. That was completely genuine. Was it? Tommy stood up and started pacing. Was it genuinely coming from a place of remorse? Or was it coming from a place of self-preservation? You were sitting in that chair, wearing that costume, terrified of what I might do. Were you really feeling sorry for me? Or were you just trying to survive the night? Nobody answered. That's the problem with guilt, you see. Real guilt, genuine remorse, looks exactly the same as self-serving apology when you're the one listening. And I can never know which one I'm getting from you. I can never know if you're actually sorry or just afraid. He stopped pacing and looked directly at me. But I can know that you're afraid. And I can use that fear. That's what tonight is really about. It's about using your fear to show you what I felt that night at the lake. Absolute, paralyzing, overwhelming fear. He turned to address all of us. Here's how the rest of the night is going to work. Each of you is going to participate in a specific scenario designed to recreate the emotional experience of that night for me. For those of you who participated in the direct humiliation, you'll experience something specifically tailored to your role. For Linda, who stood by and did nothing, You'll experience the particular terror of being trapped and unable to move or act, thus recreating her psychological imprisonment that night. What kind of scenarios? Catherine asked. That would ruin the surprise, Tommy said. You have until midnight. Those are your instructions. He turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving us sitting there in our ridiculous, humiliating costumes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then security guards appeared at each exit. You need to go back to your cabins now, one of them said. Wait for further instructions. We filed out in silence. Back in cabin 3, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what was happening. This was real. This was actually happening. Tommy had orchestrated this entire night, and whatever was about to come would be designed to psychologically torture us. At 10:30, there was a knock at my door. The same security guard stood outside. Follow me. This time, we didn't go to the lodge. Instead, he led me out into the dark, toward the woods behind the lodge complex. Where are you taking me? I asked. He didn't respond. We walked for about 5 minutes through the dark forest. The moon was bright, which was the only reason I could see where we were going. Finally, we arrived at a clearing, and the security guard gestured for me to enter. In the clearing, there was a small outdoor swimming pool, but it wasn't heated or lit. It was cold, dark, and looked absolutely terrifying in the moonlight. There was a note waiting for me near the pool's edge. I picked it up and read it. That night at the lake, I was cold. I was naked. I was vulnerable. And I was alone. Now you're going to experience that. Remove your clothes. Swim across the pool. Then, sit on the other side and wait. No matter what happens, don't move, don't scream, don't try to leave. This is your punishment, Robert. This is what bearing witness to shame means. I looked back at the security guard. This is hypothermia waiting to happen. That's understood, he said. You have 5 minutes to complete this task, or we'll cut it short and move on to our next strategy for encouraging compliance. I looked down at the cheerleader costume I was still wearing, then at the cold, dark pool. And I realized something, in that moment, that made my blood run even colder than the pool water. Tommy was going to kill us. Not quickly, not obviously, but through a series of increasingly dangerous scenarios. He was going to push us to the point of death. And because the lodge was isolated, because we had no cell service, because the authorities would never know where we were, there would be no help coming. I stripped down to my underwear. I refused to strip completely and stepped into the cold water. The cold was shocking, immediate, all-consuming. It felt like 1,000 knives stabbing into my chest. I gasped involuntarily, my heart rate spiking dangerously. I forced myself to swim across the pool, each stroke agony. When I reached the other side, I climbed out, shaking uncontrollably. And then I sat and waited. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just the sound of the wind in the trees, the endless cold seeping into my bones. Then I heard a sound, a noise coming from the forest, a crack of branches, a voice that sounded like Tommy, but it wasn't Tommy. It was a recording. Tommy's voice coming from hidden speakers in the woods around me. Do you remember, Robert, how I screamed that night? Do you remember how I called for help? Nobody came. Nobody heard me. Nobody cared. The voice was overlaid with actual screaming. A young man's voice, terrified and desperate. I thought I was going to die that night. I thought I would freeze to death, alone and humiliated in that lake. I screamed until my voice gave out. I called for anyone to help me, and you just drove away. The screaming continued, and I realized with creeping horror that Tommy was playing this entire night as a form of psychological warfare. Each task wasn't just physically dangerous. It was designed to break us mentally. I heard footsteps approaching, and I realized the security guard had returned. You can go back to your cabin, he said. I stumbled back through the forest, soaking wet, shivering violently. By the time I reached my cabin, it was past 11. I showered in hot water so hot it burned my skin, trying to feel something besides the terror that was now completely overwhelming me. At exactly midnight, there was a knock on my door. It was one of the other guests, Marcus. He was wearing regular clothes now, and his face was absolutely white with fear. Robert, we need to talk. Catherine and James, they got hurt. Real hurt. James's clown scenario involved a locked room and open flames. Catherine's involved being dropped into a dark pit. Are they alive? For now. But I think Tommy is actually going to kill us. I think that's what tonight is about. Real consequences for what we did 50 years ago. I stood there, dripping wet, listening to Marcus's words. We need to escape, Marcus continued. We need to overwhelm the security guards. Get the vehicles, drive down the mountain. There's no cell service, I said. If we get hurt in an accident on the way down, nobody will find us either. At least we have a chance outside of this lodge. He had a point. I nodded. Where are the others? I don't know, but there are 6 of us and 3 security guards. If we can get them all in one place and we coordinate. But before Marcus could finish, we heard it. A scream, coming from the main lodge. Then another scream, and a sound like breaking glass. Marcus and I bolted from the cabin, running through the dark toward the lodge. When we got there, we found pure chaos. Inside the main lodge, Linda was on the floor, bleeding from a head wound. One of the security guards was standing over her, and when he saw us, he reached for a radio on his belt. We have a situation in the lodge, he said. They're becoming uncontainable. What happened? I shouted at Linda. The scenarios, she gasped. They were getting worse and worse. And I think the scenario was designed to push us to break physically and mentally. I think we were supposed to die. Tommy walked in from the back of the lodge, and he looked completely calm, peaceful even. Well, he said, I think it's time we moved to the final part of the evening. What have you done? I demanded. What is this really about? Tommy sat down in one of the comfortable chairs in the lodge's main room and gestured for us to sit down as well. What is this about? It's about justice, Robert. Real justice. The kind that your legal system will never provide. By torturing us? Susan asked from where she was standing, the pig costume now discarded, replaced by regular clothes. By showing you, Tommy said calmly, exactly what it feels like to be at someone else's mercy. Exactly what it feels like when you have no power and no recourse. When your life is in someone else's hands and they could end it at any moment and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. But we didn't try to kill you, Rick said. We humiliated you. That's not the same as attempted murder. Isn't it? Tommy stood up and walked over to a desk, pulling out a document. After the night at the lake, I attempted suicide. 3 times, Robert. 3 times. I tried to end my life because of what you did to me. He held up the document. It was a hospital admission form from 1975. They kept me in psychiatric care for 2 months. They put me on medications that made me feel like I wasn't human. And when I got out, I had to rebuild my entire identity from scratch. I had to learn how to trust people again. I had to work through 50 years of trauma. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm genuinely sorry, but this isn't justice. This is revenge. No, Tommy said. Revenge would be if I killed you. Revenge would be if I humiliated you in front of all your loved ones. If I destroyed your reputations completely. What I'm doing is something different. I'm showing you consequences. Real, immediate, physical consequences for cruelty. He walked toward me. How many people, Robert, have suffered consequences for what happened that night? You didn't. You went on to have a successful life. A beautiful wife. Respect in your community. Grandchildren who will never know what kind of person their grandfather was. And what about you? I asked. What have you been doing for the last 50 years? I've been alive, Tommy said. I've been healing. I've been becoming someone who could survive this kind of pain and come out the other side. And I've been preparing for tonight. He gestured to the security guards. These men? They're not security guards. They're my therapists, my crisis counselors. They've been trained to observe your psychological state and ensure that nobody dies tonight. Unlike your night at the lake, I actually care about whether you survive this. But you don't care if we're traumatized, Marcus said. No, Tommy agreed. I don't. I want you to be traumatized. I want you to remember this night every day for the rest of your lives. I want the fear you felt in those pools and those locked rooms to haunt you the way the memory of that night has haunted me." He looked at me directly. "You're going to live, Robert. You're going to go home to your wife. You're going to see your grandchildren. And they will never know that their grandfather once participated in the psychological and physical torture of a helpless person. But you will know. And you'll carry that weight for the rest of your life." And then Tommy turned to leave. The security guards or therapists or whatever they were stood aside. "You can leave whenever you want," Tommy said. "Get your cars. Drive down the mountain. Call the police if you want. Tell them what happened. I don't think they'll believe you. I don't think you'll believe you when you try to describe it tomorrow." I wanted to stop him. I wanted to demand justice, to threaten him, to do something. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down in that chair, soaking wet from the pool, still shaking from the cold and from fear, and I finally understood. Tommy had won. Not through violence or death. He had won by making us face exactly what we were capable of. By showing us that cruelty has consequences. By stripping away all our pretense and success and social standing and leaving us naked and vulnerable in exactly the way he had been left 50 years ago. We left the lodge at 1 a.m. We drove down the mountain in silence. Nobody called the police. Nobody reported anything. How could we explain what had happened? How could we describe an entire night designed to make us understand our own cruelty? When I got home, Patricia was asleep. I took another shower, crawled into bed next to her, and lay awake until dawn. The reunion never made it into the news. The other guests agreed not to press charges. We all, in our own way, accepted that what happened at Cedar Mountain Lodge was what we deserved. But I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the cold of that pool. I'll never forget the sound of my own fear. I'll never forget Tommy Garrison's calm, measured voice as he showed me exactly what bearing witness to my own shame means. Because that's what Tommy Garrison did. He didn't kill us. He made us live with ourselves. So that's my story. That's what happened at the reunion. Some of you might think Tommy was a monster. Some of you might think he was justified. Some of you might think the whole thing sounds like a fever dream. I don't know which one is true anymore. All I know is that 50 years ago, I participated in the cruelty that nearly destroyed another human being. And 50 years later, that human being came back and showed me exactly what that cruelty felt like. And the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that haunts me more than any of the physical tortures Tommy put us through, is this. He was right. We had moved on. We had convinced ourselves that what happened didn't matter. We had convinced ourselves that time and distance had made it acceptable. But it never would be acceptable. And I finally learned to bear witness to my own shame. That's all Tommy wanted. That's all any of us can do, really. We can acknowledge what we've done. We can feel the full weight of our own cruelty. We can accept that consequences sometimes come, even after 50 years. And we can hope that somewhere, somehow, that acknowledgement brings even a small measure of peace to the people we hurt.